Welcome back. We're on our fourth video on the relocation series. And if you have not watched the first three videos, I recommend you do so. Now, today's topic pertaining to relocation is going to be contingencies. And this is a big part, not only on relocations, but all transactions. Though we're going to focus specifically how contingencies apply when relocating. All right, so I have my notes here to make sure I don't miss anything, since we know that there's technicalities that we're going to be discussing. So the first thing that I like to address here on relocation is this. I know there's a given fear. If someone has been living in their home for, let's say, 5, 7, 10 years, and they're looking to upgrade or upsize or move to a different school district for whatever reason, they're maybe thinking of relocating. There's that fear of what happens if I was to sell my house and I couldn't find a home. Would I be homeless? Okay, that's a big fear. So a lot of people, when they give into that fear without fully appreciating the whole process, especially when it comes to contingencies, they make a grave mistake. And in most cases, they can lose anywhere between $20,000 to $40,000 not doing it correctly. Meaning this: if they go out and find a home first and start negotiating that property before having their current property on the market, there's going to be a price to be paid on both ends, and that's where that 20 to 40,000 come into play. And a lot of real estate agents that aren't specialists in relocation, like we are here at Casa Bella Realty, either they're naive to what could happen, or they simply don't care because it's not their money, and they're focusing on two commissions and not how much money you're going to lose as a client. Now, here at Casa Bella Realty, working with a specialist in relocation, we won't let that happen. We make sure that you keep as much money in your pocket as possible because you're going to need it for your purchase. Okay, so um, how do we help you overcome this fear? Is through education, and hopefully this is the first start to that. If you've thought of relocating and you're not sure where to start or how to protect yourself, um, hopefully this video at least gets the ideas in your mind to start appeasing or bringing down that fear. Okay, so let's start with this. The proper way of doing it is to meet with a real estate professional, preferably a specialist in handling and managing relocations, because there's so many moving parts, right? And once you meet with this person, it's, of course, go through the original process of evaluating the property, looking at the marketplace, setting a price on your home, and putting it on the market up for sale. Okay. Now, for some people, this is the biggest hurdle because it's very scary to put your property up for sale without knowing where you're going next. And I understand completely, right? So, though, in order to make as much money as possible, this is the way to do it. Now, through this video, as I mentioned a moment ago, you'll learn how to avoid losing control. Okay, so you will retain control of what's going to happen. Okay, once you put your property on the market, the idea here is to attract the correct buyer. And this is through the marketing and through the screening process of a good agent and making sure it's a solid buyer, as solid as they could come, right? Financing, down payment, psychologically prepared to purchase in this market, regardless of whatever may be happening. That's not a buyer that they turn on the news and they hear the sky is falling and they just vanish, right? We need someone that's serious and committed to their decision and understand why they're buying. Okay, so that's the first thing. Now, once we do find this buyer for, we'll call it your the property being sold, your current home, then what we do is negotiate the terms of the escrow period, as well as we place a contingency in there for the buyer to recognize. They'll review it and then they'll sign it by agreeing to the other terms as well, and then opening escrow. Now, what is this contingency? And this is relating to you finding a replacement property. We negotiate a certain period of time that the buyer commits to buy the property, right? This property, and at the same time gives you, the seller, certain amount of time to find a replacement property. Now, worst case scenario, you're not able to find a replacement property. What we do is cancel the escrow before that time period lapses, and we give the buyer their deposit back, and we go back to square one. Okay, this way we retain control, that we capture a good buyer, right? And then at the same time, we let them know up front during the negotiation period that we're accepting their offer contingent upon finding a replacement property. So we're protected on that end, meaning that we're not going to be homeless. Okay. Now, the second part, now that we do have a buyer and we have that first contingency in place, and by the way, the buyer has contingencies as well on purchasing the home, which you'll find out more about it here in a moment or two, how that plays out with these other contingencies that we're discussing. Okay, so we start looking for a replacement property. Okay, and we use due diligence, working with an active agent, an active team like we work here at Casa Bella Realty. You know, it's finding the ideal home within reason, within the budget, and just staying out there and negotiating as many as possible until we get one in escrow. Now, what does this mean? When we do find the home that you would like to move forward with as your replacement property, we write an offer, and along with that offer, we also put a contingency to the seller of that property, that the offer that we're submitting is contingent upon us closing our existing escrow of the home that we're selling. Okay. Now, the seller accepts, and they're giving us a certain amount of time to close escrow on a home that we're selling, and then to remove the contingency on the purchase of the home that we're buying. Okay, so this way we're protected on both ends. Now, as far as the timelines, this is key here, because if you recall, I mentioned that on the home that we're selling, that you're selling as a property owner, the buyer has certain contingencies, and usually it's 3 weeks. Rule of thumb is 3 weeks, 17 to 21 days. You know, remember that 17 to 21 days. The buyer has the time to review anything and everything pertaining to the property they're buying, which is, in this case, is the one that you're selling, right? And within that time period, they can cancel on their own and get their deposit back, meaning that we will be left what? In limbo. So what we want to do is keep aware of those timelines. So if we have two escrows going, one on the property we're selling, and then another escrow on the property we're buying, and yes, if done correctly, we have contingencies on both, right? On the one that we're selling is a contingent upon us finding and closing escrow on the replacement, and on the replacement escrow property, we have a contingency upon this escrow closing. So up to this point, we're doing everything correctly. Now, this is where some people can mess up as far as the timelines. That buyer of the purchase of the home that we're selling, we want to make sure that those 3 weeks, rule of thumb, contingency period that they have, those contingencies are removed altogether before we remove the contingency on the replacement property. Because if we did not do so, and we remove the contingency on the replacement property, right? The contingency of us selling our home, closing escrow on the property we're selling prematurely. What could happen? What if this buyer on this home that we're selling cancels before the 17 days, 21 days? Legally, we will have to refund their deposit, and now we've already removed the contingency here. Now we're liable, and we can lose the deposit here while having to give the deposit back to the buyer here. So understanding the timelines, not only what the contingencies is very important here. Now, what I recommend here is that you work with a knowledgeable, skillful, and a great negotiator when it comes to relocation, and preferably a specialist, because our industry has first-time home buyer specialists, and I think they're very needed. And we have some here at our company. Uh, we have a department strictly for relocation. We have a department strictly for probates and trusts. We have a department strictly for investments. And each of these agents that work in these respective departments are specialists in what's done in each of those departments to better serve the clients in tackling their challenge, right? So just make sure that it's someone that's really well versed, because if not, what would happen is you'll be put under a lot of pressure at certain points, right? When it comes to these contingencies, right? It's kind of like you have to make these tough decisions along the way on the home you're selling, on the home you're buying, the whole financing aspect of it. And if you don't have someone in your corner, truly, sharing the necessary information, not feeding you candy, not telling you what you want to hear, but telling you the truth, telling you, what's needed as far as moving the deal forward. And we may have to take certain risks, though we want to mitigate those risks as much as possible, right? So uh, my recommendation, if you're thinking of relocating, if you're in Southern California, of course, reach out to us. We have specialists already, right? Now, if you're outside of Southern California, maybe a different state, make sure you interview the agent that you're going to put your property up for sale with, and ask them about these contingencies. How are they going to protect you by putting your property up for sale and having to find another property? Will you be protected on both ends, where you're not obligated by a contract, or worst case, losing money in the process? Okay, so let me look at my notes really quick. I would say that's good for now. Continue watching the series. We're going to discuss a lot more topics pertaining to relocation. Today on the contingencies, it's something that's very needed, useful, and you know what? If we understand it or don't understand it, it's part of the process. So it's best to understand it so it can work in our favor and not against us. Thank you for watching.